Hello everyone, my name is Venezia Sanchez and I'm going to be doing my 5th vlog on week 14 social statistics. So to start, I'm going to be answering question number 1. According to bomb parts and weapons of math destruction, what is a model and what is the purpose of a model? So a model is basically an abstract representation of a process which is stated in the reading. This basically means that you use what you know to predict an outcome or a situation, and the way you use that information is basically your model. So the purpose of the model is to run different scenarios to calculate the best possible outcome. So for example, they used a woman cooking for her family and what to make for her family. Using her knowledge of her family's dislikes and likes, she could create the best possible meal that all of her family will like, knowing all of their preferences. And the purpose of these models is also people can tell what to expect from the situation. So if, for this example, if she cooks her family something that they're not in the mood for or they really do not like, their response is obvious because she already knows that they don't like what she's making. So they probably won't eat it, and then she knows for future reference what not to make. The second question says, O'Neill writes that models can have a blind spot. What does that mean? So blind spots are basically aspects of a model that is left out and not taken into account. And this could be not important at all, such as maps not having buildings and landmarks, but just streets, because really maps only need streets to navigate. So that could be one aspect, or they could be really important. For example, they use teacher evaluations. So if the teacher gets evaluated on the scores of the students taking the test, and that's not a sufficient amount of information to accurately judge a teacher's performance, because they could also be behind the scenes helping out every student, doing the best they can, encouraging the students to do better and to practice and doing practice problems with them. And even though they may not show it on the test, it's definitely shown behind the scenes. And with that blind spot taken into account, you can't really judge a teacher just based off scores of students, because they do more than the model is allowing us to know. And why is it important to recognize these blind spots? So blind spots should be recognized because it basically identifies the priorities of the person making the model. And for example, like the teachers being judged based off student scores shows that the priority of the school district or the people above them is just good grades. They don't care about social connections that teachers make with students. They don't care about how much the teachers help the students as long as they're getting good grades. And that shows a lot about a situation and about the creator. Another reason to recognize these blind spots is so that you can make changes. So if they wanted to make changes, they could realize that their system is only basing the teacher's success off other people's scores, so they can make adjustments and make social connections a part of their model, or extra helping, like after school, they could put that into their model. So it just, recognizing these blind spots really only helps a model, because then you expand your thoughts and expand your knowledge of a situation. The second question I'm going to be answering is question number 2. According to bomb parts and weapons of math destruction, there are healthy models and unhealthy dangerous models. Please give an example of each. So healthy models are basically continuously changing and continuously updating their methods, because they're noticing blind spots and they're updating based on those blind spots. So their methods are also really clear to the public, and their assumptions are clear to the public. For example, baseball statistics, they display their statistics, or even any sports statistics. They display their statistics, and their assumptions are clear, the conclusions are clear, and the way they do the statistics is pretty self-explanatory. So that would be a healthy model because everything's on the table for you to know. You can basically judge if it's unfair or biased, which it usually isn't unless errors are made on calculations, but it's there for everybody to see to make those adjustments. Unhealthy models, on the other hand, are very opaque. So this means that their algorithm is hidden and that nobody can really tell them if they're doing something wrong, or they can't really justify their actions or put the actions down because they don't know what's going on behind the scenes and how the makers in the model are adjusting to blind spots and all that. An example of that would be prisoner questionnaires, and this is said in the article. The prisoner questionnaires are basically questions for the prisoners regarding their history and like diving deep into their lives, basically. And different people come from different areas, and where it kind of brings back racism, and it's basically hidden in this model because obviously if you grow up in a bad place, previous readings have identified that usually minorities are unwealthy. So if you're unwealthy, you grow up in a lower educational system and worse areas, safety-wise and healthcare-wise, anything like that. So with that disadvantage and these questions asking about their history and where they come from and how many crimes they've been involved in, you can basically walk around the streets in these bad areas and get caught for being in the wrong area at the wrong time. So a petty theft that you weren't even involved in, you'll probably get charged for because the cops in this area are really looking for crime, especially if it's a high crime rate area, and you could just be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It doesn't really work to your advantage, and these questions asking how many illegal things have you done, or how many encounters of the law have you had, it's kind of unfair versus a person in a really rich area with no background of criminal history because they grew up in a really good area. So that being said, this unhealthy models bring in unfairness, even biases, and racism too. So the next part of the question says dangerous models that O'Neill calls WMDs are often opaque, which means the algorithm is hidden, and they're black boxes. What does that mean? And for black boxes, they're basically toxic models, which unhealthy models fall under, and they don't show their conclusions, and they don't really show the methods of their model and how the model is put together. They don't show anything about it, so you really can't judge anything. And if you do judge something and you're 100% with that model and agree with how the prisoners are sent to prison, the prison sentencing, then that could encourage the model, the people behind the model, that they're doing a good job, there's nothing wrong, and then that model can become more unfair. That's called a feedback loop, which also falls under black boxes. So the next part of the question says, why is invisibility and opacity damaging and dangerous? And opacity, basically the algorithms are hidden, like I said before, and that causes unfairness, like I explained with the prisoner system. And this unfairness can bring biases, can make the model dangerous because it's really targeting one audience and one specific group, and that's what creates unfairness, and that's what creates a divide between all the people of our nation. So that's why it's dangerous. And that is the last part of that question. So I'll move on to answering Felicia's question. Felicia's question was, would the smoke detector model be considered reliable if there's no reliable model according to the author? So what I think the author means is that there can be no reliable model because there's so many mistakes. Nothing is really reliable, just like last week's topic. You can't really trust anything too much. You can use that information to help you, but you can't trust it too much. So if there can always be errors made, that's why I feel like the smoke detector can't be considered a reliable model, because there can be incidents where it doesn't go off, or like it's blocked by something. There's just so many things that could go wrong. So therefore, I don't think it would be considered a reliable model, but it'd be considered a really accurate model. So the two questions that I'd like to propose are, what factors impact the models created? Could it be experiences? Could it be your opinions based on like the models that we make? What influences them? And the second question I'd like to ask is, how can blind spots lead to weaknesses in models? How can not noticing them lead to weakness in models, and basically their effect on models? Thank you for listening. That's my last vlog.